At my father's funeral, surrounded by somber faces and black attire, my husband Blake leaned close to my ear. His voice was cold when he whispered, "I changed the lock on the $30 million condo you inherited. If you're not okay with it, maybe we should split." The timing was calculated for maximum devastation. Instead of crumbling, I burst out laughing. Everyone stared in confusion, assuming grief had broken me. They had no idea the condo was worth far more, or that my father had legally protected it from exactly this scenario. Dad always said, "Plan for betrayal, Lainey, then you'll never be surprised." I'm Lainey Harper, only daughter of Franklin Harper, real estate mogul and the most cautious man in New York. 6 years ago, I met Blake Wilson at the annual Metropolitan Art Society charity gala. I was 30 when our eyes locked across the crowded ballroom. He approached with a confidence that both charmed and disarmed me. Blake had piercing blue eyes, perfectly tailored suits, and a smile that made everything else fade away. "Your laugh caught my attention from across the room," he said, handing me a glass of champagne. "It stands out in a crowd full of polite, rehearsed chuckles." What followed was a whirlwind romance straight out of a fairy tale. Blake sent flowers to my office every Monday. He remembered tiny details from our conversations. He planned elaborate dates that always seemed perfectly tailored to my tastes. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. After 8 months, he proposed on a private yacht sailing around Manhattan at sunset, the glittering skyline behind him as he dropped to one knee. "You're everything I've been searching for," he said, eyes shining with what I thought were tears of joy. "I want to build a life with you, Lainey." My father's reaction to our engagement was lukewarm at best. Franklin Harper built his empire from nothing and trusted very few people. Over dinner at his penthouse the night we announced our engagement, he studied Blake with the same scrutiny he applied to business deals. "Tell me about your 5-year plan, Blake," Dad asked, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "I've been developing a boutique investment firm," Blake replied smoothly. "Small, exclusive clientele. I believe in quality over quantity." Dad nodded slowly. "And what do you know about Lainey's work at the foundation?" The Harper Family Foundation was my passion, the channel through which our family's wealth-funded education initiatives across the city. Blake answered perfectly, demonstrating knowledge of our recent projects and future goals. Still, something in Dad's expression remained guarded. Later, as I helped him clear the dishes, Dad spoke quietly. "He's charming," he conceded. "But remember what I taught you about charm in business. That it's often used to distract from substance," I replied, rolling my eyes. "Dad, not everyone is trying to pull one over on us." He squeezed my shoulder. "I hope you're right, sweetheart." Despite his reservations, Dad gradually seemed to warm to Blake. He invited him to golf, introduced him to business associates, and even asked his input on a property development in Brooklyn. I took this as Dad's seal of approval. The first 3 years of marriage were beautiful. Blake and I traveled extensively, renovated our brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, and talked about starting a family soon. I continued my work with the foundation, while Blake's investment firm slowly grew. Everything changed 3 months ago when Dad called me to his office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. His assistant Tracy's red-rimmed eyes should have prepared me, but nothing could have. "Pancreatic cancer," Dad said without preamble, sitting behind his imposing desk. "Stage 4. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. My father, the strongest person I knew, the man who negotiated billion-dollar deals and ran 5 miles every morning at 68 years old, was dying. "Treatment options?" I managed to ask. "Limited. 6 months, maybe less." I moved into his penthouse that week to care for him, bringing Blake with me. It was then I first noticed the shift in my husband. Subtle at first, he started working later, became irritable when I asked about his day, and seemed distantly polite with Dad, rather than genuinely concerned. 2 weeks after Dad's diagnosis, I stopped by Blake's office to bring him lunch. His assistant Jennifer seemed surprised. "Blake's not here," she said. He left for his meeting at the Sullivan Group about an hour ago. Peter Sullivan was my father's longtime business rival. They'd been competing for properties and clients for 30 years, their mutual dislike legendary in New York real estate circles. Blake had never mentioned any dealings with Sullivan. That night when Blake came home, I asked casually about his day. "Productive," he said, loosening his tie. "Client meetings back to back." The lie hung between us, but I said nothing. Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation. Perhaps Jennifer was mistaken. The next morning, I went to organize Dad's medication and found him already awake, reviewing documents in bed. "Sleep well?" I asked, setting down his pills and water. "Well enough." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit with me a minute." I perched on the edge of the seat, noting how his cheeks had hollowed in just weeks. "I'm updating my will," he said. "The Manchester condo on Park Avenue. I'm leaving it specifically to you." The Manchester was the crown jewel of Dad's personal holdings, a full-floor luxury condo in one of the most prestigious buildings in Manhattan, conservatively valued at $30 million. "Dad, don't talk like that. You'll beat this." He gave me a look I'd known since childhood, the one that said he saw through my evasion. "The Manchester stays in your name only, Lainey. Not joint ownership with Blake." I felt a flash of defensiveness. Blake wouldn't care about that. He has his own money. Dad just nodded, but his expression remained unconvinced. Later that week, while Blake was showering, his phone buzzed repeatedly on our nightstand. I normally wouldn't look, but something intuition perhaps made me glance at the screen. 3 missed calls from PS and a text that read, "Need to discuss the Harper situation. Call as soon as possible." That evening, I went to Blake's home office while he was at the gym. I told myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me suspicious. But Dad had taught me to trust my instincts. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath folders of client information, I found a thick file labeled Harper Assets. Inside were detailed notes on all of Dad's properties, businesses, and investments. Handwritten in margins were notes like transfer potential and liquid within 6 months. Most disturbing was a page titled Post, Franklin Strategy with bullet points including leverage Manchester property and minimize foundation commitments. My hands shook as I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it. My husband had married me for my father's money. He was planning something, waiting for my father to die. The realization was like ice water in my veins. Still, a small voice whispered doubts. Perhaps this was all business research. Perhaps I was jumping to conclusions. I decided to watch and wait, to give Blake the chance to prove my suspicions wrong. That chance never came. As Dad's condition deteriorated, Blake became increasingly absent. He cited client emergencies, business trips, and late meetings. I spent nights alone at Dad's bedside, watching old westerns his favorite, and helping him manage pain that grew more intense by the day. "Where's that husband of yours?" Dad asked one evening as I adjusted his pillows. His voice had grown raspy, barely above a whisper. "Working late again," I replied, trying to keep bitterness from my tone. Dad's hand found mine, his grip weaker than I'd ever known it. "You remember our summer at the lake house? You were 12, I think." I smiled at the memory. "When you taught me to sail, you capsized 3 times before lunch. Because you kept telling me to tack into the wind at the wrong moment." We both laughed, though his ended in a painful cough. When he caught his breath, his eyes found mine with startling clarity. "But you figured it out by afternoon. You always figure things out, Lainey." Those quiet evenings became precious to me. Dad shared stories I'd never heard about meeting my mother, about his early days struggling to secure his first property loan, about mistakes he'd made and lessons learned. "The most valuable thing I can leave you isn't property," he told me one night. "It's knowing how to stand on your own 2 feet in any storm." Meanwhile, Blake's behavior grew more suspicious. I found him in Dad's home office one afternoon, hurriedly closing a drawer when I entered. Just looking for a pen, he explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When I checked later, Dad's copy of the Manchester property deed had been moved. Not taken, just examined, and replaced slightly askew. 4 weeks before Dad passed away, his attorney Marcus Jenkins arrived for what Dad called final arrangements. They spent 3 hours behind closed doors, while Blake paced anxiously, asking repeatedly how much longer they would be. The next day, I overheard Blake on the phone in our bedroom. "It's happening exactly as we discussed," he was saying quietly. "The old man's signing everything over this week. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Once the Manchester property transfers, we move quickly." My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to slip away unnoticed. That night, I called Madison, my oldest friend since college. "I need to talk to you," I said when she answered. "About Blake. Something's wrong." We met for coffee the following morning at a small cafe far from our usual spots. Madison listened without interruption as I detailed everything Blake's absences, the mysterious file, the phone calls. "I hate to say this," Madison said finally, reaching for my hand across the table, "but I've never trusted him. Remember before your wedding? I tried to tell you he seemed calculating." She had. 3 days before our wedding, Madison had taken me aside. "Are you sure about this?" she'd asked. "Something feels off about him, Lainey. The way he looks at you when you're not watching, it's not love, it's assessment." I dismissed her concerns as typical pre-wedding jitters. Now, her words rang with painful truth. "What do you think he's planning?" Madison asked. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Dad passed away quietly in his sleep 2 weeks later. Blake was, predictably, away on business when it happened. When I called to tell him, his first question wasn't about me or how Dad had gone. "Did he sign the final will?" he asked. The formal reading of the will took place 3 days later in Marcus Jenkins' wood, paneled office. Blake sat beside me, his posture tense with anticipation. Dad had amassed considerable wealth properties across Manhattan, controlling interests in development companies, art collections, and investments. As Marcus read through the allocations, I noticed Blake growing increasingly agitated. Significant donations went to Dad's favorite charities. Several loyal employees received generous provisions. Properties were allocated to various business entities, all except one. "And the Manchester property at 816 Park Avenue," Marcus read, "is bequeathed in its entirety to my daughter, Lainey Elizabeth Harper, as her sole and separate property." Blake's hand tightened painfully around mine. The specific legal language "sole and separate property" meant the condo remained exclusively mine, even in marriage. Dad had made sure of that. "Is that everything?" Blake asked when Marcus finished. Marcus peered at him over his glasses. "Mr. Wilson, your wife has just inherited considerable assets. Perhaps your focus should be on supporting her through her grief." Blake had the decency to look chastened, but I felt his resentment radiating through his tightly controlled expression. That evening, Blake suddenly became attentive, bringing me tea and asking about funeral arrangements. But his eyes kept drifting to the folder of papers Marcus had given me, the Manchester property deed among them. "We should move into the Manchester," he suggested casually. "After the funeral, fresh start." "I'm not ready to think about that," I replied. Over the next few days, Blake made multiple comments about our new home and what we'll do with the Manchester. Each time, I deflected. On the morning before the funeral, I checked our joint bank accounts and discovered something alarming. Over the past 3 months, Blake had been transferring small sums, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, to a separate account I didn't recognize. Together, these transfers totaled nearly $300,000. He was building a nest egg, preparing for something. That same afternoon, I received a call from our family banker, Thomas Brewer. "Mrs. Wilson, I wanted to confirm your authorization on the mortgage inquiry for the Manchester property." "What mortgage inquiry?" I asked, pulse quickening. Your husband requested information about potential equity loans against the property. He said you were planning renovations. I never authorized that, I said firmly. And please note that no financial decisions regarding that property should be made without my direct personal approval. Of course, Mrs. Wilson. I'll update our records immediately. Blake was planning to mortgage the condo to extract cash from it as quickly as possible. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed was ugly indeed. The day before Dad's funeral, I drove to his penthouse to finalize details with the event planner. Blake had begged off, claiming an important client meeting. While there, I noticed his car in the visitor's garage. The client meeting was apparently in the same building where my father had lived. Confused, I took the elevator up and used my key to enter quietly. Voices drifted from Dad's study, Blake's, and a woman's. I moved silently down the hallway. It has to be after the funeral, Blake was saying. She'll be too emotional to think clearly. You're cutting it close, the woman replied. Sullivan won't wait forever. Trust me, Tiffany. Once I have access to the Manchester property, everything moves quickly. We'll have our money within 30 days. And what about your wife? There was a pause before Blake responded. She'll get over it, or she won't. Either way, I'll be set. I retreated silently, rage building with each step. In the parking garage, I located Blake's car and, acting on impulse, checked beneath the passenger seat where he often tossed his gym bag. Instead, I found a burner phone, a cheap flip model I'd never seen before. The text messages confirmed everything. Blake had been communicating with both Peter Sullivan and someone named Tiffany Andrews for months. Their plan was clear. Blake would secure access to the Manchester property, take out maximum equity loans against it, and disappear with the cash before I realized what had happened. Sullivan would then purchase the debt-laden property at a discount once the bank foreclosed. I documented everything with my phone camera, my hands trembling with anger and betrayal. Then I carefully replaced the burner phone exactly where I'd found it. That evening, Madison came over to help me prepare for the funeral. I showed her the evidence I'd gathered. That absolute monster, she hissed, scrolling through the photos. Doing this while you're burying your father. I need your help, I told her. Tomorrow at the funeral, I need you to watch Blake. Note everyone he speaks with, especially if there's a woman named Tiffany. Madison squeezed my hand. What are you going to do? What Dad taught me, I said grimly. Figure things out. Later that night, as Blake slept beside me as far on his side of the bed as possible, I lay awake, remembering a conversation with my father from years ago. Always have a backup plan, Lainey, he'd told me during my first real estate negotiation, and never let them see you sweat. The morning of the funeral dawned cold and clear. Blake was solicitous, helping me with my necklace and offering a steadying arm as we left for the church. His performance was impeccable, the grieving son, in law, supporting his devastated wife. If I hadn't known better, even I might have been convinced. The church filled quickly. Dad had been respected and feared in equal measure throughout the business community. Competitors came to pay respects alongside longtime employees and friends. I greeted them mechanically, Blake at my side playing his role to perfection. Madison arrived early, giving me a meaningful look as she hugged me. I'll keep watch, she whispered. Shortly before the service began, I noticed Blake tense beside me. Following his gaze, I saw a striking blonde woman slip into a back pew. Though we'd never met, I knew instinctively this was Tiffany. The slight nod she gave Blake confirmed it. Just before we took our seats in the front row, Marcus Jenkins approached. The family attorney had been Dad's friend for 30 years, their relationship extending far beyond legal matters. Your father would be proud of your strength today, he said, embracing me. Then, surprising me, he added in a low voice, Come see me first thing Monday. There's more to discuss. The service was a blur of hymns and eulogies. Blake maintained physical contact with me throughout, a hand on my back, an arm around my shoulders. To anyone watching, he was the picture of supportive husband. Only I felt the calculating nature of each touch. During my cousin Sarah's eulogy about Dad's generosity, Blake leaned close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "I changed the lock on the $30 million condo you inherited," he whispered. "If you're not okay with it, maybe we should split." The statement was so brazen, so calculated in its cruelty at precisely this moment, that something inside me snapped. Not in despair, but in a sudden, crystal, clear understanding of the man I had married. He expected tears, begging, confusion, emotional reactions that would leave me vulnerable to his manipulation. Instead, I laughed. Not loudly, but distinctly enough that several nearby mourners turned in shock. Blake stiffened beside me, clearly thrown by my reaction. "Is she okay?" someone whispered behind us. "Poor thing," another voice murmured. "Grief affects people differently." Blake's hand tightened painfully on my arm. "What's wrong with you?" he hissed. I turned to meet his gaze, letting him see nothing but calm amusement in my eyes. "Nothing at all," I replied softly. "We'll discuss it after the service." His confidence visibly faltered. This was not the script he had planned for. Throughout the remainder of the service, I felt him watching me nervously, recalculating his approach. As we stood to exit, Madison caught my eye from across the church. She tilted her head slightly toward Tiffany, who was already slipping out a side door. The message was clear: Blake's accomplice was making a hasty retreat. At the cemetery, I maintained my composure, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. Blake remained uncharacteristically silent, watching me with growing concern. He had expected to break me at my most vulnerable moment. Instead, he now faced an opponent he couldn't read. After the burial, as guests began to disperse, Marcus Jenkins approached again. "Remember, Monday morning," he said quietly, pressing something into my hand, a small envelope. I nodded, slipping it into my purse without Blake noticing. Whatever Dad had arranged, Marcus was clearly part of it. As our car pulled away from the cemetery, Blake finally broke the tense silence. "About what I said in the church," he began, his tone conciliatory. "It came out wrong. I was just trying to change the locks on my property without permission and then threaten divorce during my father's funeral." I finished for him. "Yes, I understood perfectly. Lainey, you're upset. We should talk when you're calmer." "Oh, I'm extremely calm," I assured him. "And yes, we definitely need to talk." That evening, after Blake had gone to bed claiming a migraine, I opened the envelope Marcus had given me. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note in my father's distinctive script. "Storage Unit 47B, Secure Storage Solutions, West 54th Street. The combination is your birthday. Trust Marcus. Trust yourself. Love always, Dad." The funeral reception was held at Dad's favorite restaurant, the Capitol Grill. Throughout the evening, Blake kept trying to corner me for a private conversation, but I deliberately stayed surrounded by people. Madison remained close, watching Blake's increasingly frustrated attempts. "He's made 3 calls in the past hour," she whispered, when we had a moment alone. "And that Tiffany woman is parked across the street. I saw her when I stepped out for air." "They're panicking," I said. "Good." Near the end of the reception, an elegant older man approached me. Walter Simmons, Dad's oldest friend and business partner. "Your father was like a brother to me," he said, taking my hands in his. "Whatever you need, my dear, you only have to ask." "Actually," I replied quietly, "there is something. Could we speak privately tomorrow?" He nodded gravely. "Of course. Come to my office whenever you're ready." As guests began to leave, Blake finally managed to isolate me in a quiet corner of the restaurant. "We need to talk about the condo," he said, his voice urgent but trying to maintain a calm facade. "I only changed the locks for security. After Franklin passed, I was worried about me having independent access to my own property." I finished. His expression hardened slightly. "Don't be dramatic, Lainey. I'm trying to protect our interests." Our interests, I repeated. Interesting choice of words for a property specifically left to me alone. We're married, he countered smoothly. What's yours is mine. Not in this case, I said. But we can discuss it tomorrow with Marcus. I've scheduled a meeting for 10 a.m. Blake couldn't hide his alarm. Why involve attorneys? This is between us. Is it? I asked innocently. You seem to think it involved Tiffany, too. The color drained from his face. Who? Blake. I'm exhausted, I said, turning away. Take me home. We'll sort everything out tomorrow. That night, I waited until Blake was asleep, then slipped out of bed and retrieved my emergency bag packed days earlier with essentials and hidden in the guest room closet. I left a note saying I needed space to grieve and would be staying at Madison's for a few days. Instead, I drove directly to Secure Storage Solutions. The night attendant barely glanced at my ID before letting me through. Unit 47B was in the climate-controlled section, typically used for valuable items. My birthday month, day, year, opened the keypad lock on the first try. Inside, I found a surprise. Not documents as I'd expected, but a fully equipped office space. A desk with a computer, filing cabinets, and on the wall, a large corkboard with what looked like a case investigation, photos, documents, and strings connecting various points. In the center was a picture of Blake, surrounded by images of Peter Sullivan, unknown woman I recognized as Tiffany, and several other people I didn't know. Sticky notes in Dad's handwriting detailed meetings, phone calls, and financial transactions, dating back nearly 5 years to before I even met Blake. A large envelope on the desk was labeled simply Lainey. Inside was a letter from Dad. My darling daughter, it began. If you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and Blake has shown his true colors now that I'm gone. I've never wanted to be wrong about something more in my life. The letter explained that Dad had begun investigating Blake shortly after our engagement. His initial concerns were just a father's caution, but several red flags had emerged: Blake's investment firm clients that couldn't be verified, his conveniently aligned interests with Dad's business ventures, and most damning, a discovered connection to Peter Sullivan. I considered showing you this evidence immediately, Dad wrote, but I knew you wouldn't believe it without seeing it yourself. You loved him, and love creates powerful blinders. So I put protections in place and waited, hoping I was wrong. Dad had hired Taylor Williams, a former FBI agent turned private investigator, to document Blake's activities. Taylor had uncovered that Blake was actually William Blake Turner, who had changed his name 7 years ago after several failed investment schemes in Boston. He specialized in cultivating relationships with wealthy individuals, gradually gaining their trust and access to their assets. Taylor will contact you the day after my funeral, Dad wrote. Trust him completely. All the evidence you need is here, legally obtained and admissible in court if necessary. The final paragraphs of Dad's letter broke my heart all over again. I'm sorry, Lainey. Sorry that I won't be there to help you through this. Sorry that I couldn't protect you from this pain. But I've never doubted your strength. You are your mother's daughter, brilliant, resilient, and far tougher than anyone knows. One last thing, the Manchester property is worth considerably more than the $30 million valuation Blake has likely fixated on. The adjacent property was recently rezoned, making the combined footprint worth at least $75 million to the right developer. Blake doesn't know this, which may give you an advantage. Remember what I always told you. In business and in life, true power isn't what you show, but what you keep hidden until the right moment. I love you more than words can express. Trust yourself, Lainey. You already know what to do. I sat in that storage unit until dawn, reviewing every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence my father had compiled. By the time sunlight began filtering through the small high window, I had stopped crying and started planning. At precisely 8 a.m., my phone rang an unknown number. Lainey Harper? A deep voice asked when I answered. Yes. This is Taylor Williams. Your father asked me to call you today. I believe you found his research room. I have. Then you know what your husband is planning. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about Blake's whisper during Dad's eulogy, about the locks he'd changed, about the lies that had formed the foundation of our entire relationship. Everything, I said firmly. I want to do everything. Marcus Jenkins' office occupied the top floor of a sleek midtown building. I arrived at 9:30, half an hour before my scheduled meeting with Blake. Marcus was waiting, his usual formal demeanor softened by genuine concern. I've been expecting you, he said, showing me to his private conference room. I assume you visited the storage unit? I nodded. My father was more thorough than I could have imagined. Franklin was exceptional at contingency planning, Marcus agreed, sliding a thick folder across the table. These are the legal protections he put in place for the Manchester property and all your other assets. The documents outlined an intricate web of legal safeguards. The Manchester condo had been placed in an irrevocable trust with me as both trustee and beneficiary. Any transaction involving the property required multiple verifications, including in-person confirmation with Marcus and 2 other trustees, Walter Simmons and my godmother, Eleanor Reynolds. Blake can't touch it, Marcus explained. Even if he convinced you to sign documents, they would be invalid without the other trustees' approval. What about the locks he changed? Marcus smiled thinly. The building management has been instructed to only recognize your authority regarding the property. 1 call from me, and they'll change the locks back immediately. And if Blake claims rights as my husband? Your father anticipated that too. Marcus tapped a specific document. 3 years ago, shortly after your wedding, Franklin had you sign this as part of the annual foundation paperwork. I remembered signing dozens of documents that day, trusting Dad completely. Looking closely now, I recognized a postnuptial agreement, clearly specifying that the Manchester property and several other key assets would remain solely mine in the event of divorce. I never even read it, I admitted. Franklin knew you trusted him. He didn't want to raise your suspicions about Blake before he had concrete evidence. We were interrupted by Marcus's assistant announcing Blake's arrival. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked. More than ready, I assured him. Blake entered looking immaculately groomed, but tense. His expression flickered between confusion and wariness when he saw me already seated with Marcus. Lainey, I was worried sick, he said, moving to embrace me. Your note said you were at Madison's, but when I called her... Please sit down, Mr. Wilson, Marcus interrupted coldly. We have serious matters to discuss. Blake stiffened but took a seat across from us. What's this about? If it's about the locks, I already explained to Lainey it was just a security precaution. This is about fraud, I said calmly. Specifically, yours. Blake's face registered shock, quickly replaced by wounded innocence. What are you talking about? Lainey, you're not thinking clearly. Grief can. William Blake Turner, I interrupted. That's your real name, isn't it? The color drained from his face. Who told you that? My father, I replied, opening the folder Taylor had prepared. He knew everything, Blake. About your past in Boston. About your deal with Peter Sullivan. About Tiffany Andrews. Tiffany is just a business associate, he attempted weakly. I slid a photo across the table Blake and Tiffany, in an intimate embrace, dated 2 months earlier. Business, I repeated flatly. Like the business of planning to mortgage my property and disappear with the money? For a moment, Blake seemed genuinely speechless. Then his expression hardened, the charming mask falling away completely. You can't prove anything, he said coldly. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, Mr. Turner, we have extensive documentation of your conversations with Peter Sullivan, your fraudulent attempts to access Mrs. Wilson's property, and your prior history of similar schemes. The FBI is quite interested in reopening their investigation into your activities in Boston. Blake's confidence visibly faltered. This is ridiculous. Laney, we can work this out between us. There is no us, I replied. There never was. It was all a lie. Not all of it, he insisted, voice softening as he tried a new approach. I did fall in love with you, Laney. Yes, I made mistakes, but we can start fresh. The condo is worth $75 million, not 30, I finished for him. Something you would have discovered if you'd done better research. Blake couldn't hide his shock at this revelation. I could almost see him recalculating in his head, the greed transparent in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to sign these divorce papers Marcus has prepared. You'll relinquish any claim to my assets, and in return, I won't press charges for fraud, attempted theft, or conspiracy. This is blackmail, Blake sputtered. No, Marcus corrected. This is mercy. Mrs. Wilson is offering you a way out that doesn't involve prison. Blake looked between us, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. I need time to think, to consult my own attorney. You have 24 hours, I said, standing up. After that, everything goes to the authorities. Every document, every recording, every photograph. As I turned to leave, Blake called out, What did you mean at the funeral? Why did you laugh when I told you about the locks? I paused at the door. Because my father taught me to recognize a trap before stepping into it. He saw through you from day one, Blake, and eventually, so did I. Later that afternoon, I met with Taylor Williams at the storage unit office. The former FBI agent was tall and serious, with observant eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Your father hired me 3 years ago, he explained, showing me his credentials. At first, it was just background verification on Blake, but when red flags appeared, we dug deeper. Taylor had documented Blake's regular meetings with Peter Sullivan, his affair with Tiffany Andrews, who turned out to be Sullivan's executive assistant, and most damning, his systematic emptying of our joint accounts. He's been siphoning small amounts for months, Taylor confirmed. Nearly $350,000 in total, sent to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Can we recover it? With the right pressure? Yes. Men like Blake typically keep escape routes open. He won't want to risk prison time. I nodded slowly. My father suspected all of this from the beginning, didn't he? Even before we married. Taylor's expression softened slightly. Your father was an exceptional judge of character, but he also understood that you needed to see the truth for yourself. All those meetings with Dad near the end, I realized. The private conversations, the legal documents. He was setting this up. Franklin Harper's final act was ensuring your protection, Taylor confirmed. He called me the day before he died to make sure everything was in place. The realization brought fresh tears to my eyes. Not of grief or betrayal this time, but of profound gratitude for my father's foresight and love. What happens now? I asked, wiping my eyes. Taylor smiled for the first time. Now? We spring the trap your father laid, and trust me, Blake has no idea what's coming. Over the next 3 days, I implemented what Taylor called controlled pressure. First, I had Marcus contact the building management for the Manchester property. By noon, the locks had been changed again, and security had been instructed not to allow Blake access without my explicit permission. Next, I visited Walter Simmons at his office, bringing him fully up to speed on Blake's schemes. That miserable snake, Walter fumed, his distinguished face flushed with anger. Franklin was right about him all along. I need your help, I told him. As a trustee for the Manchester property, but also as someone my father trusted implicitly. Walter leaned forward. Anything, my dear. Just name it. I explained my plan to not only protect my assets, but to expose Blake's connection to Peter Sullivan. Walter, who had his own long-standing grudge against Sullivan, enthusiastically agreed to assist. Sullivan's been trying to get his hands on that block for years, he confirmed. The rezoning makes it the perfect location for his planned development. He likely promised Blake a significant cut for delivering the Manchester property. Then, let's make them think their plan is working, I suggested. Walter smiled slowly. Franklin would be proud of that thinking. That evening, Madison helped me move the last of my essential belongings from the Brooklyn brownstone to a temporary apartment Taylor had secured for me the lease, under a corporate name, to keep Blake from finding me. He's been calling me nonstop, Madison reported. Asking where you are, if you're okay, whether you're thinking rationally. What did you tell him? That you're devastated about your father and confused about your marriage. I implied you might be willing to reconcile if he gives you space. I nodded approvingly. Perfect. Keep him thinking there's still a chance. The following day, I met with the detective Taylor had recommended Jack Reeves, a financial crimes specialist with the NYPD, who had worked with the FBI on similar cases. Based on the evidence you've provided, Detective Reeves explained in his cluttered office, we have grounds to investigate both Blake Turner and Peter Sullivan for conspiracy to commit fraud. However, building a case that will stick in court requires more direct evidence of their intent. What kind of evidence? I asked. Ideally, recorded conversations explicitly outlining their plan, documentation of money changing hands, anything that proves beyond doubt that Turner married you specifically to access your father's assets. I thought of the whispered conversation I'd overheard, of Blake's comments during Dad's funeral. He's getting desperate, I observed. He might make mistakes if he thinks his plan is falling apart. Detective Reeves nodded slowly. That's often how we catch these types. They panic. They overreach. On day 4, I made my first strategic move. Through Marcus, I let Blake know I was willing to discuss our situation. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a private room at the Yale Club, where Marcus was a member. Blake arrived looking haggard but determined. His usual polished appearance had slipped, revealing the pressure he was under. "Laney," he began, reaching for my hands across the table. I pulled back slightly. "I've been so worried about you. Disappearing like that. It's not like you." I needed space to think, I said, injecting vulnerability into my voice. Everything happened so fast. Dad's death, then your announcement about the locks, the threat of divorce. Blake's expression softened, sensing an opening. I handled it terribly. The timing was inexcusable. But you have to understand, I was trying to protect our interests. By changing the locks without telling me? I was worried about Sullivan, he improvised smoothly. Your father and he were rivals. With Franklin gone, I was concerned Sullivan might try something underhanded to gain access to the property. The irony was almost laughable, but I maintained my confused expression. Why would he care about my condo? The rezoning, Blake explained, looking relieved to be on seemingly safer ground. It makes the Manchester property extremely valuable. Sullivan has been assembling parcels on that block for a major development. How do you know so much about Sullivan's plans? I asked innocently. Blake hesitated fractionally. Business circles. Everyone's been talking about it. I nodded slowly, as if considering his explanation. I'm still hurt, Blake. But I understand your concerns might have been valid, even if your approach was wrong. Hope flickered in his eyes. The hook was set. I'm so relieved you see that, Laney. I've been beside myself thinking I might lose you. I need time, I insisted, and some assurances. First, I want access to my property restored immediately. Of course, he agreed quickly. I'll have new keys made today. And I need to understand our financial situation better. All the joint accounts, investments, everything. No more secrets. This request made him visibly uncomfortable, but he nodded reluctantly. Complete transparency. I promise. One more thing, I added, forcing a tremor into my voice. I found out something about the Manchester property. It's potentially worth much more than we thought, 75 million with the rezoning. Blake couldn't quite hide the flash of naked greed in his eyes. That's incredible news. All the more reason to protect it properly. I'm considering options for it, I continued. Maybe selling while the market is hot. Selling? Blake leaned forward eagerly. That's very smart thinking. I could help with that. I know several interested parties. I bet you do, I thought, but outwardly I just nodded tentatively. Maybe. Let me think about it. As we parted, Blake kissed my cheek, his confidence visibly restored. I'll fix everything, Lainey. You'll see. Less than an hour after our meeting, Taylor called to report that Blake had made a call to Peter Sullivan from a payphone near the Yale Club. He took the bait, Taylor confirmed. He told Sullivan you're considering selling the Manchester property and that you're vulnerable right now. His exact words were, emotionally fragile and trusting me again. And Sullivan? Instructed Blake to push for a quick, private sale. They're accelerating their timeline. That evening, Madison called in a panic. Tiffany showed up at my apartment looking for you. She claimed to be an old friend from college. When I said you weren't there, she kept trying to get information about where you might be staying. They're getting desperate, I noted. Good. The next morning, I received a text from Blake, suggesting dinner at our favorite restaurant to continue rebuilding. I agreed, setting the stage for the final phase of our plan. Before dinner, I met with Detective Reeves, Taylor, Marcus, and Madison at Marcus's office to review the strategy. The restaurant has been arranged per your specifications, Detective Reeves confirmed. The private dining room has recording equipment in place. We'll have officers positioned throughout the establishment. What if he doesn't incriminate himself? Madison worried. He will, Taylor assured her. Men like Blake believe they're the smartest person in any room. Give him enough rope, and he'll hang himself. Marcus handed me a small device. This looks like a compact, but it's an additional recording device. Keep it on the table throughout dinner. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance ahead. Let's finish this. Blake greeted me at the restaurant with a bouquet of lilies, my favorite flowers, a detail he'd always remembered. The gesture might once have touched me. Now I recognized it as calculated manipulation. You look beautiful, he said as we were seated in the private dining room. I've missed you so much. I've been thinking a lot about us, I replied, placing the recording device disguised as a compact on the table beside my purse. About the future. I have too. Blake reached for my hand across the table. Lainey, these past days have been a wake-up call. I've been taking you for granted, focused too much on business. Speaking of business, I said carefully, I've made a decision about the Manchester property. Blake's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around mine. Oh? I'm going to sell it. The market's perfect right now with the rezoning, and honestly, I don't want property that will just remind me of Dad. The naked relief and excitement that flashed across Blake's face was almost comical. That's a very wise decision, emotionally and financially. I've already had an offer, actually, I continued. Blake's smile faltered slightly. From whom? Peter Sullivan's development company, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. $70 million, all cash. He approached Marcus yesterday. You can't sell to Sullivan, Blake blurted too quickly. Your father would never forgive that. It's a very generous offer, Blake. Let me handle this, he insisted, leaning forward. Sullivan's trying to take advantage of your grief. I can get you a better deal. With whom? Blake hesitated only briefly. I have investors, connections who would pay more. 75 million, minimum. These connections, I pressed. Would they happen to include Tiffany Andrews? Blake froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Who? Or should we discuss the offshore account, in the Caymans, where you've been transferring money from our joint accounts? $350,000 to be exact. The color drained from Blake's face. Lainey, I can explain. Please do, I invited calmly. Explain how you plan to steal my inheritance. Explain your deal with Peter Sullivan to sell him the Manchester property once you'd forced me out. Explain why you married me in the first place. This is crazy, he sputtered, looking around as if seeking an escape route. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, I countered. My father saw through you from the beginning. He spent the last 3 years documenting your schemes, your real identity, your past frauds in Boston. He knew everything, Blake. Or should I call you William? Blake's shock quickly transformed into anger. You can't prove anything. Actually, I have proof of everything. The offshore accounts, your meetings with Sullivan, your affair with Tiffany, the fraudulent mortgage applications you submitted in my name. His eyes darted to the exits again, calculation replacing anger. What do you want? Money? Is that it? I want you to admit what you did, I said simply. Right here, right now. Blake laughed bitterly. You're recording this? Amateur move, Laney. Professional, actually, I corrected him. Detective Reeves advised on the setup. For the first time, genuine fear flickered in Blake's eyes. Police involvement? This is between us, Laney. We can work this out. There is no us to work out, I replied. There never was. You saw a vulnerable woman with a wealthy father. I was just a means to an end for you. Blake stared at me for a long moment. Then his expression shifted again, the mask dropping completely to reveal cold calculation. Fine, he said flatly. Yes, I married you for your father's money. Sullivan promised me $10 million for delivering the Manchester property once the rezoning went through. Happy now? But you can't prove the rest. I smiled calmly. I don't need to. You just did. On cue, Detective Reeves emerged from an adjoining room, flanked by 2 officers. William Blake Turner, he announced formally. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand larceny, and attempted property theft. Blake lunged across the table, reaching for me. You bitch! You planned this all along. One of the officers restrained him immediately while Detective Reeves continued reading his rights. As they led him away, Blake continued hurling threats and obscenities. I remained seated, strangely calm as I watched the man I had once loved or thought I loved reveal his true nature completely. Madison emerged from where she had been waiting and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. It's over, she whispered. You did it, Laney. But it wasn't quite over yet. There was still one more piece of justice to deliver. 1 month after Blake's arrest, I stood in the lobby of the Manchester building, keys in hand. I hadn't visited the property since before Dad's death, and entering now brought a wave of bittersweet emotions. Dad had loved this place, often saying it represented the pinnacle of his achievements. The full-floor condo was exactly as he had left it, elegant, understated luxury with breathtaking views of Central Park. As I wandered from room to room, I could almost hear his voice, sharing stories about acquiring the property, the negotiations, the vision he had for it. Marcus met me there that afternoon to discuss final matters regarding Blake's case. He's accepted a plea deal, Marcus explained, setting his briefcase on the marble kitchen island. 5 years for fraud, with additional charges pending from his previous schemes in Boston. And Sullivan? Denying everything, of course. But with Blake's testimony and the evidence we've provided, the DA is confident they have a strong case. I nodded, feeling strangely empty. The victory brought closure, but not the satisfaction I had expected. What about Tiffany Andrews? Marcus smiled slightly, turned state's evidence immediately. Apparently, she and Blake had a falling out when she discovered he was planning to take the money and disappear without her. Honor among thieves, I murmured. There's one more thing, Marcus said, removing an envelope from his briefcase. Your father left this with specific instructions that I deliver it to you 1 month after resolution of any threats to your inheritance, as he put it. I accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a letter as I expected, but a deed. The deed to a property in the Berkshires I'd never heard of. What is this? Marcus's eyes twinkled. Your father's contingency plan. He purchased this property 20 years ago, kept it completely separate from his public holdings. It's a 200-acre estate with a lake house. He renovated it 5 years ago but never used it. Why wouldn't he tell me about it? Franklin believed in compartmentalization. The fewer people who knew about this property, the safer it would remain as a true sanctuary if you ever needed it. I studied the deed, noting the property had been placed in a trust with my name as the sole beneficiary, a trust established on my 18th birthday. He planned this before he even met Blake, I realized. Marcus nodded. Franklin Harper never left anything to chance. Later that week, I invited Madison, Walter Simmons, Taylor Williams, Detective Reeves, and Marcus to the Manchester condo. They arrived to find the space transformed, furniture rearranged, walls freshly painted in warm colors, Dad's imposing artwork replaced with lighter, more contemporary pieces. To new beginnings, I toasted, raising a glass of champagne. And to my father, who made them possible. To Franklin, they echoed. After our impromptu celebration, I asked everyone to stay for an announcement. I've made a decision about the Manchester property, I began. I'm not selling it. Walter looked surprised. Sullivan's development group has raised their offer to $80 million. I know, I smiled, but I have a different vision for this place. I revealed my plan to transform the Manchester property into the headquarters for a new venture, the Franklin Harper Foundation for Financial Education, dedicated to helping people recognize and avoid investment fraud. My father built his empire on knowledge and caution, I explained. I want to share those values with others who might be vulnerable to people like Blake. The foundation would offer free seminars, one-on-one counseling, and resources for identifying predatory financial practices. I had already secured commitments from several of Dad's former associates to serve as advisors. Franklin would have loved this, Walter said, his eyes moist with emotion. Using the very property Blake coveted to help prevent others from falling victim to similar schemes. In the months that followed, life took on a new rhythm. The foundation launched to significant media attention, partly due to the publicity surrounding Blake's case. I found myself speaking at conferences, universities, and community centers about financial literacy and fraud prevention. 6 months after Blake's arrest, I finally visited the Berkshires property. The lakeside estate was everything Dad had described, in the deed peaceful, secluded, and utterly beautiful. The main house was a perfect blend of rustic charm and modern comfort, with a wraparound porch overlooking crystal-clear water. On the mantelpiece above the stone fireplace, I found a framed photograph I'd never seen before, Dad and me sailing on a lake, both of us laughing as we struggled with the sails. I remembered the day perfectly. I was 12, capsizing repeatedly but refusing to give up until I mastered the small boat. Beside the photograph was a handwritten note. Lainey, if you're reading this, you've weathered the storm and found safe harbor. I always knew you would. This place is your sanctuary now. Use it well. The boat in the boathouse is yours too. Try not to capsize it too often. All my love, Dad. I spent 2 weeks at the lake house, sailing alone each morning, and sitting on the porch each evening watching the sunset. The solitude brought healing and clarity I hadn't realized I needed. Upon returning to the city, I threw myself into expanding the foundation's reach. We opened satellite offices in 3 additional cities, focusing on areas with high rates of financial fraud. The work was challenging but deeply satisfying. Each person we helped felt like a small victory against people like Blake. On the 1-year anniversary of Dad's death, I hosted a memorial event at the Manchester property, now fully renovated as the foundation's headquarters. The guest list included everyone who had helped me through the past year, along with many of Dad's longtime friends and colleagues. During the event, Walter approached with a surprise guest, Thomas Reynolds, the CEO of one of Dad's former competitor companies. Thomas has an interesting proposal, Walter explained. Reynolds, a distinguished man in his 50s, explained that his company was developing innovative financial protection software and wanted to partner with the foundation to make it accessible to consumers. Franklin and I were competitors, but we respected each other, Reynolds explained. When I heard what you were doing with the foundation, I knew he would have been incredibly proud. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone on the terrace, looking out over the park Dad had loved so much. Madison joined me, handing me a fresh glass of champagne. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked. "I was just thinking about that moment at the funeral," I replied, when Blake whispered about changing the locks, thinking he'd destroyed me. "And you laughed," Madison remembered. "It was the moment I truly understood what Dad had been teaching me all along," I explained. "That true wealth isn't measured by properties or money, but by the strength to stand on your own." "To standing strong," Madison toasted, clinking her glass against mine. "And to unexpected blessings," I added. "Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us exactly where we need to be." The foundation continued to grow beyond anything I could have imagined. Blake served his sentence. Sullivan's company collapsed amid scandal, and the Manchester property became a symbol of resilience rather than loss. The $75 million condo my husband had schemed to steal became the launchpad for helping thousands of people protect themselves from similar predators. Dad would have appreciated the irony and the justice in that outcome. Have you ever faced betrayal that eventually led to something better in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest moments reveal our true strength. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales of resilience and transformation. And if you know someone who might need this message of hope after hardship, share it with them. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to our greatest triumphs.